I was a total outsider, someone who never even existed in the original storyline. Yet I had already read ahead and knew exactly how this book ended. Even Olivia viewed me as some sort of self-righteous martyr at first. She watched with cold eyes as I spent my entire paycheck on her and moved her into my cramped apartment, until she finally broke down one night and asked if I secretly thought she was beneath me. I knew the truth that no one else did. She was destined to be the story's most lethal villain. In the original plot, her paralysis and abandonment would have twisted her into a monster who destroyed the hero's empire and took down everyone in her path. To prevent that, I had to keep breaking my role as a background character, like the time I held her close when she fell trying to bake a cake and insisted on crawling back in her chair alone. When she finally managed to stand on her own during physical therapy, I told her she was incredible with tears in my eyes. When she asked if I regretted our meeting, I simply asked if she regretted being alive. I knew that as long as the world didn't break her spirit, this story would never reach its tragic conclusion. I was reincarnated, or to be more precise, I was unceremoniously dumped into this world. I found myself trapped inside a novel called The Titan of Industry. It was one of those cliché but wildly popular bestsellers about a self-made billionaire named Ethan Harrison. Ethan was an illegitimate son who clawed his way to the top of the corporate ladder through sheer grit. On the other hand, Olivia Harrison was the designated villain of the story. She was written as a ruthless, vengeful woman who eventually ended up paralyzed, loathed by society, and completely abandoned. According to the original script, a horrific car accident was supposed to leave her wheelchair-bound for life, leading her family to discard her like trash. She was meant to die alone in a damp, freezing basement apartment. It would have been days before anyone even noticed she was gone. Right now, I was standing in a hospital corridor that reeked of antiseptic. I watched the pale, lifeless woman sitting in her wheelchair as my heart hammered against my ribs. "Take this cripple away," a voice barked. "I don't care where she goes, but I'm not spending another dime on her medical bills. If you have to, just dump her on the street and let her rot," the woman continued. Her shrill voice shattered the quiet hum of the hospital wing. I hurried toward the noise, turning the corner just in time to see a wheelchair being shoved out of a patient room with zero care. The wheelchair nearly collided with me. The woman sitting in it was nothing but skin and bones, her dark hair matted and greasy as it hung around her face like tattered rags. She was as still as a statue. If I hadn't seen her chest moving slightly, I would have assumed she was already dead. "Olivia, don't think I'm being heartless here," the middle-aged woman sneered, spitting toward the wheelchair. "But honestly, look at yourself. What is the point of you even staying alive?" I walked forward with a scowl and pulled a tissue from my pocket. I reached out and gently wiped the spit from her hair, brushing the dark tangles away from her face. Even though she looked like a ghost, her features were striking and elegant. She had a perfectly straight nose and thin, delicate lips. Even in this state, it was obvious she had once been stunning. "Ma'am," I said, turning to the woman who was speaking so venomously, "this is a hospital. I suggest you watch your mouth." "Oh look," she scoffed. "Another good Samaritan." She looked me up and down with a condescending smirk. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" "I'm the attending physician, Lucas Sterling," I replied, squaring my shoulders. "The patient needs rest, so I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Give me a break." She shrieked. "Olivia Harrison is nothing but a burden now. Her legs are useless, her company is gone, and even her fiancé couldn't leave fast enough. If I were her, I would have ended it already just to avoid the embarrassment. How much is the outstanding balance?" I asked, my voice cutting through her rant. The head nurse nearby checked her tablet and whispered that it was a little over $9,800. I pulled out my phone and logged into my banking app. My monthly salary had just hit my account, bringing my balance to just over $10,000. I had been planning to buy a new phone this month, but that didn't matter now. "I will cover the bill," I said, looking the woman right in the eye. "Since you were so intent on abandoning her, I will take full responsibility for her from this moment on." The hallway fell into a deathly silence. Finally, The woman in the wheelchair opened her eyes. Her eyes were a deep, freezing black, resembling shards of dark obsidian. She gave me a brief, hollow glance before looking down again. The head nurse grabbed my arm and whispered that I shouldn't be so impulsive. "I know what I'm doing," I said, patting her hand to reassure her. I turned back to the aunt and asked what she thought of the arrangement. The woman stared at me like I had lost my mind. She probably had never seen anyone so eager to take a disabled person off someone else's hands. "Fine by me," she said with a shrug, looking as though a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "If you want to be the idiot who pays for her, I won't stop you. She is your problem now. Just don't come crying to me when you run out of money." With that, she turned on her heels and marched away, her footsteps echoing with a mix of lingering irritation and pure relief. I let out a long sigh and knelt down beside the wheelchair. I brought myself level with her gaze and introduced myself as Lucas Sterling, a doctor at the hospital. I asked her if she would be willing to come home with me. She lifted her head slowly, her gaze as sharp as a surgical blade. She asked me why I was doing this. I took a moment to choose my words carefully and told her that no one deserved to be discarded like garbage. She let out a hollow, freezing laugh before turning her head away, slipping back into that vacant and rigid state. The list of belongings Olivia Harrison had left to her name was heartbreakingly short. She had a small bag with 2 changes of clothes and a broken iPhone that wouldn't even turn on. As I pushed her out of the hospital entrance, she remained completely silent. She looked like a beautiful porcelain doll that had been shattered and glued back together. My apartment in Logan Square wasn't exactly spacious, just a modest 1-bedroom that would be a tight fit for 2. After I finally managed to navigate her into the unit, I parked her wheelchair in the center of the living room. I told her that this would be her home now. She scanned the cramped space, a faint, mocking smile touching her lips. She asked if doctors were being paid so well these days that I could afford a place like this while taking on a charity case. I ignored the bite in her tone and simply asked if she was hungry, offering to cook something. She gave me a 2-word response, telling me she wasn't. She turned her chair toward the window, leaving me with nothing but the sight of her cold, distant back. I shrugged and headed into the kitchen to heat up 2 bowls of tomato soup. By the time I brought them back out, she hadn't moved an inch. I set a bowl down on the side table next to her and told her to eat something, mentioning it was just classic tomato soup. She finally turned her head, her eyes lingering on the red soup before moving up to meet mine. She asked me what I was really after. I broke a few crackers into my own bowl. I told her I just wanted a clear conscience. She scoffed and called it ridiculous, yet she reached out and took the bowl anyway. We sat there in silence, both focusing on our soup. The only sound in the apartment was the soft clink of spoons against porcelain. Halfway through her meal, she suddenly slammed the bowl down and complained that it tasted awful. I pointed out with a smile that she had already finished half of it. Her expression stiffened and she looked away again, muttering that it was too salty. The real challenge arose when it was time for bed. Since I only had one bed, the logistics were difficult, and Olivia flatly refused to let me help her change. "I can do it myself," she rasped, her knuckles white from gripping the armrests of her chair. A faint, awkward flush crept on her pale cheeks. I raised an eyebrow and asked if she was absolutely certain. I reminded her that the apartment wasn't exactly handicap accessible. She gritted her teeth and told me to get out. I retreated to the hallway and leaned against the doorframe, listening intently for any sound from inside. I heard the creak of the wheelchair on the hardwood, followed by the rustle of clothes. Then came a sickening thud as something hit the floor, making my stomach drop. "Don't come in," she shrieked. Her voice was sharp and desperate. I had my hand on the doorknob, but her warning stopped me in my tracks. She insisted she could handle it. About 10 minutes later, I finally heard her. She whispered a barely audible confirmation that she was finished. When I entered, she was tucked under the covers up to her chin, her entire body as rigid as a statue. Her discarded clothes were scattered across the floor, and the wheelchair was tipped over on its side. I whispered good night and gently tucked the blanket in around her. She closed her eyes, her long lashes casting soft shadows on her face. In the dead of night, the sound of muffled sobbing woke me up. I could see the pale moonlight filtering through the curtains. Olivia was facing away from me, her shoulders trembling with every sob. I shifted in my sleep, intentionally making enough noise to be heard. The crying ceased instantly, and the room became silent once again. I had the day off, so I slept in until noon. When I finally woke up, I realized someone had placed an extra blanket over me. Olivia was already up, sitting in her chair by the window and quietly reading a book. I rubbed my eyes and mumbled a greeting. Without looking up, she informed me that it was already 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I felt a bit sheepish as I finally rolled out of bed. I noticed a container of oatmeal and some fruit sitting on the table. When I asked if she had prepared it, she coolly informed me it was just takeout. She explained that she had used my phone to pay for it via Venmo. I took a bite and found it was actually quite good. When I thanked her, she just gave a non-committal hum and went back to her book. The sunlight streaming through the window bathed her in a soft glow. In that light, she didn't look like a broken, bitter patient. She looked like the refined, upper-class woman she was born to be. After I finished eating, I suggested we go for a walk outside. Her expression soured instantly, and she refused. I tried to persuade her by saying we would just go to the park downstairs. She snapped that she wasn't going, her voice rising to a sharp pitch. She swiped a glass off the table in her frustration, sending it crashing to the floor and spilling water everywhere. She asked if I just wanted the whole world to see how pathetic and humiliated she had become. I didn't say a word as I grabbed some paper towels and cleaned up the mess, letting the subject drop. Later that afternoon, I headed out to pick up some groceries. When I returned, the living room was empty. The bedroom door was shut tight, but I could hear a faint shuffling sound coming from inside. I knocked on the door and called her name, telling her I was home. There was no answer. A sudden, cold wave of dread washed over me. I threw the door open and burst into the room. Olivia was sitting on the edge of the bed with a paring knife in her hand. The blade was pressed firmly against her wrist. I lunged at her and wrenched the knife from her grip, shouting at her to stop. She looked up at me with eyes that were completely devoid of warmth. She asked if I planned on taking away her right to die as well. I was shaking with fury. I reminded her that I had just spent $10,000 to keep her in this world. I told her that her life was my responsibility now, and she didn't have my permission to throw it away. Sometime later, the scent of cooking filled the apartment. A simple dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables was waiting on the counter. She told me to try it without looking me in the eye, adding that I shouldn't force myself if it was terrible. I took a fork and tried a piece of the chicken. It was perfectly cooked and seasoned beautifully. My eyes widened in genuine surprise as I told her it was delicious. A small smile started to form on her lips before she quickly hid it away. She mumbled that it was too salty, but from that day forward, she took charge of the kitchen. I bought her a new iPhone, and she spent most of her time researching different recipes on YouTube. Her skills in the kitchen improved drastically in a very short time. One evening, she announced we were having salmon as she began to plate the meal. I leaned in to catch the scent and told her it smelled incredible. She gently pushed me away, telling me not to get too close. However, I noticed that her expression didn't hold that usual flash of revulsion. On my days off, I started taking her to the local park. Initially, she fought me on it, hiding her face behind a massive scarf and dark sunglasses. Over time, she began to relax. On nice days, she was often the one to suggest that we head outside for some fresh air. One day, while I was massaging her legs to help with the muscle atrophy, she suddenly asked me why I was being so kind to her. I stopped and looked up at her. I asked if she really thought I was, and she gave me a serious look. She pointed out that I could have easily left her at the hospital and walked away. I went quiet for a moment. I told her that looking at her was like looking at a younger version of myself. I knew what it felt like to be lonely and desperate, just waiting for someone to pull me out of the dark. There was a long silence before she finally whispered a thank you. Hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off my heart. From then on, the changes in her personality became impossible to ignore. She started putting effort into her appearance again, often wearing her hair in a sharp, high ponytail. If I stayed late at the hospital, She would text me asking when I'd be back. She even started a routine of making me hot lemon tea every evening. But I also saw her moments of darkness. Sometimes she would just stare at her legs, her expression turning cold and haunted. One day, I decided to be direct and asked if she wanted to walk again. I told her I knew an excellent physical therapist, but she cut me off before I could finish. She told me not to waste my time. I dropped the subject for then, but I secretly reached out to the therapist and booked an appointment for the following month. The turning point came on a night of heavy storms. I was finishing a late shift when a torrential downpour started. My colleague, Sarah Evans, offered me a ride home. I sank into the passenger seat and thanked her, joking that I would have looked like a drowned rat if I had walked. Sarah laughed it off and reminded me that we were friends as well as colleagues. When we pulled up to my building, I invited her up for some tea while the storm passed. The moment I opened the door, I saw Olivia sitting in the dark living room. Her expression was like a thundercloud. She asked who Sarah was in a voice that was pure ice. Sarah tried to introduce herself with a polite wave, but Olivia snapped that she wasn't talking to her. Her eyes were locked onto me with an intensity that was terrifying. She demanded an explanation. I was caught completely off guard and stammered that Sarah was just a co-worker who had been kind enough to drive me home in the storm. Olivia let out a sharp, mocking laugh before spinning her chair around and retreating into the bedroom. She slammed the door with a deafening bang. After Sarah left, I tentatively opened the door to the bedroom. She was sitting by the window with her back to me, her shoulders trembling. I called her name softly, and when she spun around, I was shocked to see her face covered in tears. She asked in a cracked voice if I was disgusted by her or by the wheelchair. I finally realized what was going on, and my heart sank. I told her she was being ridiculous and that I could never feel that way. She demanded to know why she felt so inadequate, her hands gripping the armrest so hard they were turning white. She asked why I hadn't let her take care of me, crying that she couldn't even bring me an umbrella or hold me when I was wet from the rain. I knelt down and took her hands in mine. I told her those things didn't matter to me. She screamed that they mattered to her and that she absolutely hated the person she had become. She admitted that sometimes she wanted to lock me in the apartment so I would be forced to rely only on her and look at no one else. My heart skipped a beat at the intensity of her words. The moonlight hitting her face revealed a feverish, desperate flush. Her eyes were wild and obsessive. In that moment, I felt like I was seeing the real Olivia Harrison for the first time. She wasn't the quiet woman who cooked for me and made me tea anymore. She was the woman from a novel, the one who loved with a terrifying, broken passion. I whispered that I loved her for who she was, not for whether she could walk. She went still as more tears rolled down her face. I leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to her lips, asking if she finally understood. Her eyes widened before she suddenly grabbed the back of my neck and pulled me back into a deep, desperate kiss. She held on to me with an intensity that felt like she was trying to keep herself from drowning. After we officially started dating, Olivia became incredibly affectionate. She would constantly call me into the kitchen while she was cooking, claiming she needed me to taste the food when she really just wanted an excuse to kiss me. Every time I pulled a night shift, my phone would blow up with messages from her. She would ask when I was coming home and send a barrage of random emojis. I even caught her secretly researching physical therapy and trying to do leg exercises in bed. Slowly but surely, the idea of walking again was starting to take root in her mind. I teased her about her secret training, and her face turned bright red. She admitted it, and I pulled her into a tight hug, telling her how proud I was. I told her I'd already set up an appointment with a specialist for next week, but she stopped me. She wanted to wait until after my birthday. I had completely forgotten my birthday was coming up. I was working a double shift that day and didn't get home until late at night. The apartment was completely dark when I walked in. I called out for her while fumbling for the light switch, but nothing happened. Her voice came from the bedroom, informing me that the power had gone out. I followed the sound of her voice and found a room lit by a few flickering candles. Olivia was sitting on the edge of the bed with a slightly lopsided cake sitting on the nightstand. She whispered a happy birthday, admitting that it was her first attempt at baking and it might not taste great. In the soft glow of the candles, she looked more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. I noticed the fresh burn marks on the back of her hand and felt a lump form in my throat. I managed to choke out a thank you, telling her that I absolutely loved it. She gave me the most beautiful smile I had ever seen. Just as we were about to cut the cake, the power surged back on and the overhead lights flickered to life. The sudden brightness revealed the absolute disaster in the kitchen. There was frosting everywhere and baking tools scattered across the floor. But the most heartbreaking sight was the clear set of drag marks leading from the kitchen to the bedroom. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She must have fallen and had to crawl her way back to her chair. Despite the pain and struggle, she had been determined to finish that cake for me. I pulled her into my arms and held her as tight as I could, my heart aching with love for her. She leaned into my ear and whispered that she loved me. Life was peaceful and sweet for a while until a sudden knock at the door changed everything. I opened it to find a couple I had never seen before standing on my doorstep. The man was tall and striking, while the woman beside him was elegant and soft-spoken. They were carrying several high-end gift bags. I asked them who they were looking for, completely confused. The man introduced himself as Ethan Harrison and his wife as Jennifer Bishop. He told me they were there to see Olivia. I froze on the spot. These were the main characters of the novel. I told them she wasn't home and started to close the door with a stony expression. I heard Olivia call my name from the living room, telling me to let them in. I turned back to her in surprise. Olivia was sitting in her chair, cradling the stray cat we had rescued the week before. Ethan looked absolutely floored and asked her if she really had a cat now. Olivia gave him a sharp look and asked if it was against the law. Jennifer was just as stunned, commenting that Olivia seemed like a completely different person. Olivia cut them off and told them to stop the small talk. She ordered them to put their gifts down and head to the kitchen to help with the vegetables. I just stood there, speechless. I watched as the two most powerful people in the book's universe obediently went into my kitchen to do chores. Meanwhile, Olivia just sat on the sofa, calmly grooming the cat as if this were a perfectly normal Tuesday. I pointed toward the kitchen, unable to even form a sentence. Olivia reached out and pulled me down to sit beside her, explaining that they were her brother and sister-in-law. I couldn't believe it and started to mention how different this was from a story. She cut me off, simply stating that the book was one thing and reality was another. She explained that Ethan was actually her half-brother. She told me their father was a monster who had driven her mother to her grave and spent his life trying to turn the siblings against each other. She spoke about it with a strange sense of detachment, as if she were narrating someone else's life. While we were eating, Ethan pulled out a credit card. He told her there was $4 million on the card. Olivia snatched it from him immediately, saying she wouldn't bother with the sentimental thanks, but she was definitely keeping the money. She then told him to use some of it to buy the apartment for her. Ethan and Jennifer were stunned into silence, and I was right there with them. After dinner, the two of them stepped out onto the balcony to talk. I caught a bit of their conversation and heard Ethan remark on how much she had changed. Olivia's voice was softer than I had ever heard it when she replied that it was because she finally had someone worth protecting. After they had gone, Olivia took my hand and asked if I would go with her to her physical therapy appointment the following week. I looked at her, feeling a massive surge of joy. I asked if she was certain, and she kissed me, confirming that she was. She told me she wanted to stand again so she could be by my side on her own 2 feet. The moonlight in her eyes looked like scattered stars. In that moment, I knew the bitter, broken Olivia from a novel was gone for good. In her place was a woman who had learned how to love and be loved in return. On the day she started her physical therapy, the weather was absolutely beautiful. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in bright streaks. By the time I woke up, she was already dressed and waiting for me in her chair. She had opted for comfortable athletic gear and a black t-shirt, her hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. She looked sharp and ready to take on the challenge. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and asked if we were really doing this today, surprised by her enthusiasm. She nodded, though I noticed her fingers were tapping nervously on the armrest. She reminded me that I was the one who made the appointment. I got out of bed and knelt down in front of her, taking her hand and asking if she was truly ready for this. She bit her lip and looked away for a split second before her gaze hardened with resolve. She told me she couldn't live like this anymore. I smiled and gave her a quick kiss on the forehead. I promised her I would be by her side every step of the way. The physical therapy center was impressive, filled with state-of-the-art equipment. Her therapist was a professional woman in her 30s named Lynn who had a very warm personality. After a thorough initial evaluation, Lynn walked us through the recovery plan. She noted that the muscle atrophy wasn't as severe as they had feared. She warned us that the nerve damage would take longer to heal and that the initial stages would be incredibly painful. She told me that Olivia would need all the emotional support I could give. I nodded, keeping my eyes on Olivia. She was sitting on the exam table with her head down, trying to look composed, but I could tell she was terrified. The first day was relatively simple. It consisted mostly of assisted joint movements and some light electrical muscle stimulation. Even with such low-impact exercises, she was soon dripping with sweat. She gripped the sides of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. I stood by her side, feeling a pang of sympathy, and told her it was okay to admit if it hurt. She just shook her head and gritted her teeth, insisting she was fine. By the time the session was over, she looked like she had seen a ghost and was completely wiped out. I knelt down to wipe the sweat from her face, but she suddenly grabbed my wrist. Her voice was barely a whisper when she asked if I thought she was pathetic. I told her not to be ridiculous and shook my head. I looked her in the eye and told her she was the strongest person I had ever met. She didn't say anything else. She just leaned her head against my shoulder and let out a long sigh. The 3 months that followed were a grueling test of endurance. Her progress was agonizingly slow, but it was there. She started regaining sensation in her legs, beginning with a tingling numbness that eventually turned into actual feeling. Eventually, she could even tell the difference between hot and cold. Lynn told us it was a fantastic sign that her nerves were finally starting to wake up. One afternoon, when the clinic was empty, Olivia sat on the edge of the mat and gripped the parallel bars. She was determined to pull herself up. Her arms were shaking violently, and sweat was pouring down her face. I stood in front of her with my arms open, encouraging her to try one more time. I promised her I would catch her if she fell. She took a deep breath and gave it everything she had, pushing herself upward with sheer willpower. Her knees shook as they took her weight, and then, miraculously, she was standing on her own 2 feet. She whispered in disbelief that she was actually standing. Her eyes were wide with shock. I cheered for her, quickly stepping in to support her waist so she wouldn't fall. I told her to take it slow and not to rush. Even though her legs were trembling, they were holding her up. It only lasted a few seconds, but for that moment, she was standing under her own power. She looked up at me with her eyes brimming with tears. She cried out that she had done it, and I pulled her into a massive hug. She collapsed against me, her whole body shaking with emotion. I held her close and whispered that I never doubted her for a second. We celebrated that night with a bottle of wine. Olivia was relaxing on the sofa while I knelt on the floor, giving her legs a gentle massage. I asked her if she was sore, and she just shook her head. She looked down at me and reached out to trail her fingers across my cheek. She thanked me, and when I asked her what for, she said it was for never giving up on her. I took her hand in mine and promised her that I would never leave her side. She didn't say anything. She just leaned down and kissed me. Her recovery continued to improve every day. While she couldn't go long distances yet, she was able to navigate the apartment with a walker. We were finally finding our own rhythm. She started helping out more around the house, and even discovered passion for baking. I'll never forget the first time she tried to make cookies. The kitchen looked like a war zone. I rushed in to find her frantically trying to turn off a smoking oven with flour smeared all over her face. She looked absolutely miserable and declared the whole thing a disaster. I couldn't help but laugh as I wiped the flour off her cheek. I told her it was perfectly normal for a first attempt, but she was still upset about wasting the ingredients. I suggested we try again, and after a moment, she agreed. She spent the entire afternoon back in the kitchen. By the end of the day, she had produced a tray of cookies. They were oddly shaped but actually edible. She had a triumphant little smile on her face when she showed them to me. It was rare to see her looking so proud of herself. I tried one and teased her that they were just barely good enough to pass. She gave me a mock glare and told me not to eat them if I didn't like them. I just laughed and kissed her, telling her that they were special because she made them. I told her I was going to eat every single one, even if they were terrible. Her face flushed a deep red, and she gave me a playful shove, telling me I was far too charming for my own good. Ethan started coming by more often to check on her. He always brought bags of vitamins and organic food, insisting that she needed to keep her strength up. Olivia would roll her eyes and complain about him bringing more junk, but the second he left, she would carefully organize everything he brought. I eventually asked her if she and her brother had always been close. She was quiet for a long time before admitting that he had always looked out for her. She sighed and said she had just been too stubborn to notice it back then. I didn't press her for more. One day, Ethan turned the conversation toward me. He asked me about my family and suggested we all get together for a meal sometime. I took a breath and told him with a small smile that I didn't have any family in this world. I explained that there was no one for me to invite. Ethan looked genuinely embarrassed and started to apologize, but I just brushed it off. I told him I had long since grown used to it. Olivia had been listening to us and suddenly chimed in, telling me that I was coming home with her this weekend. I was caught off guard by her suggestion. She looked out the window for a long moment before turning to me and suggesting that, since she was doing so much better, we should just get married. I froze completely and asked her to repeat herself. She looked me straight in the eyes and said it again, clearly and firmly. She wanted us to get married. My heart felt like it stopped for a second. I couldn't stop the massive grin that was forming on my face. I agreed, but then I added a small condition. I teased her that I was supposed to be the one to propose. She just scoffed and asked why the order even mattered. I laughed and took her hand in mine. I told her that she was stuck with me for the rest of her life now. She squeezed my hand and gave me a knowing smile, telling me she had no intention of ever letting me go. Olivia was making incredible progress and could now walk short distances with the help of crutches. We went to a medical supply store one afternoon to look for a more advanced brace. She tried on several different pairs before settling on a lightweight carbon fiber set. I told her they seemed like they provided great support without being too cumbersome as I adjusted the straps. I asked her how they felt as she took a few tentative steps. She nodded and said they were fine. Just then, we were interrupted by a shrill, unpleasant voice from behind us. We both turned around to see a middle-aged woman standing there in a ridiculous fur coat, calling out Olivia's name. Her makeup was caked on her face, and she was loaded down with designer shopping bags. She looked Olivia up and down with an expression of pure disgust. I could feel Olivia go rigid beside me, her hands tightening on her crutches. I recognized her immediately as her aunt, Laura Harrison. This was the woman who had treated Olivia like garbage at the hospital. She walked toward us in her heels and asked if cripples were allowed to go shopping now. She had a cruel smile on her face as she looked me over, commenting that Olivia seemed to have found herself a decent nurse. She asked me if it was exhausting taking care of someone who was useless. I felt a surge of pure rage, but before I could say a word, Olivia spoke up. Olivia's voice was dangerously quiet as she told Laura to watch her mouth. Laura gave a theatrical gasp, pretending to be offended. She mocked Olivia's temper and suggested she was only acting tough because she had someone to back her up. She stepped even closer to us. She lowered her voice to a malicious whisper and told Olivia she was delusional if she thought she could ever go back to her old life. She called her nothing but a broken cripple. Olivia told her she had better pray she stayed on top forever. The sheer venom in Olivia's gaze was enough to make Laura take a step back. Laura started to shout something back, but I stepped in front of Olivia and told her to back off in a voice that was pure ice. I warned her that if she didn't stop harassing my girlfriend, I would call security immediately. She just let out a shrill, hysterical laugh. She mocked the idea of us being together, saying Olivia had clearly been forced to settle for a broke doctor. She tossed her hair and started to walk away. She intentionally slammed into Olivia's shoulder as she passed by. Olivia stumbled, and I quickly reached out to steady her. I asked if she was all right, but she just kept her eyes on Laura's retreating back. She quietly asked me to take her home. Olivia didn't say a word on the ride home. I knew seeing Laura again had reopened some very deep wounds. Later that night, I found her in the study. She was hunched over her laptop at the desk. The glow of the screen made her features look sharp and intense. I walked up behind her and gave her shoulders a gentle squeeze, asking her what she was working on. Without looking up, she told me she was looking into Laura Harrison. I leaned in and saw a complex business report displayed on her screen. She had found several medical spas owned by Laura that were currently under investigation for illegal medical practices. Olivia let out a cold laugh, saying she had no idea how much dirty money her aunt had laundered through those clinics over the years. She explained that Laura had been using cheap fillers and passing them off as luxury products, all while performing procedures without a license. The list of customer complaints was miles long. I remarked that it sounded like a massive scandal. Olivia told me that was only the beginning as she opened another file. She revealed that Laura had been cooking the books and evading taxes for years. I was shocked and asked her how she had managed to get her hands on all this information. She finally looked up at me with a sharp, dangerous smile. She reminded me that she hadn't spent all those years in the corporate world for nothing. It was a stark reminder of who she used to be. Before the accident, she was the legendary, ruthless CEO of Harrison Global. Even now, her instincts and her connections were as sharp as ever. I asked her what she was planning to do with the information. She shut her laptop and told me she was going to make sure her aunt paid for everything she had done. A week later, several of Laura's medical spas were hit with surprise inspections. 3 of them were shut down immediately. When the news broke, her clients demanded refunds and her investors pulled out all at once. To make matters worse, the IRS launched a full audit and discovered nearly $10 million in unpaid taxes. Laura went into a total panic, desperately trying to use her old connections to fix the situation. She eventually called Ethan, sobbing for help. She begged Ethan to talk to his sister on her behalf, asking him to convince Olivia to drop the matter. She claimed she was sorry for everything she had done in the past. Ethan hung up on her before she could finish and immediately called Olivia to let her know. His voice sounded heavy when he told her that Laura was looking for her. He told her that her aunt sounded truly desperate. Olivia didn't even look up from the coffee she was making as she asked him why she should care. Ethan let out a sigh and informed her that all of Laura's assets had been frozen. Her house was being foreclosed on, and her debts were piling up. I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy for her as I listened. I could still perfectly recall how she had treated Olivia at the hospital, acting as if she couldn't wait for her to die. It was poetic justice that she was now the one begging for help. Her downfall turned out to be even more spectacular than we had imagined. Her entire business empire crumbled in an instant, leaving her buried in debt. She was hounded by creditors every day and eventually had to sell her mansion and her fleet of luxury cars just to stay afloat. She ended up in a tiny, dilapidated apartment. The ultimate irony was that all the high society friends who used to fawn over her wouldn't even pick up her calls anymore. One night, while Olivia and I were out to dinner, we spotted her across the street. She was wearing cheap, tattered clothes, and her hair and makeup were a total disaster. All of her old arrogance had completely vanished. The moment she saw us, she looked away and hurried off in the opposite direction. I asked if she wanted to go after her, but Olivia just took a sip of her wine and said there was no point. There was no sense of triumph or pity in her expression. She looked at her aunt as if she were a total stranger. It was clear that Laura Harrison didn't matter to her anymore. On our way home, Olivia mentioned that she was thinking about something. She told me she was considering getting involved with Harrison Global again. I was surprised and started to mention her legs, but she smiled and said it wouldn't be an issue. She added that Ethan had been carrying the whole company on his shoulders for too long. She told me she wanted to help him out. I squeezed her hand and promised to support her in whatever she decided to do. She leaned her head on my shoulder and thanked me. I kissed her forehead and asked her what for. She thanked me for giving her the courage to start her life over. I just smiled and pulled her closer. I knew that this was just the beginning of her new life. As for the people who had hurt her, they were finally seeing the consequences of their actions. I had nothing but hatred for the world after the accident. My legs had become useless, dead weight that I was forced to carry around. Everyone who had once claimed to care about me, my friends, my fiancé, and even my family, had treated me like I was contagious. When my aunt came to see me in the hospital, I kept my eyes shut and pretended to be asleep. I heard her shriek about someone taking the cripple away, her voice sounding like nails on a chalkboard. She vowed she wouldn't spend another cent on me. I wasn't even shocked. The Harrisons had always prioritized money and power over family and loyalty. My father was the perfect example of that. He had discarded my mother for a business alliance. Even I had been guilty of it, having spent years trying to push Ethan down to protect my own position. I figured this was just my karma. I was ready to die until that Dr. Lucas Sterling knelt down in front of me. He literally bought my life for $10,000. He brought me to his tiny, one-bedroom apartment filled with worn-out furniture. He had this incredibly earnest, almost naive look on his face when he told me that this was my home now. I scoffed at the idea of having a home. People like me didn't get homes. He made me some soup that was so bland it was almost inedible. I forced it down anyway because I was absolutely starving. That night, I completely lost it and screamed at him to get out when he offered to help me change. I insisted on doing it myself, but I couldn't. I couldn't even handle a simple task like getting dressed. When I fell out of my chair, the pain was blinding. I bit my lip until I could taste blood just to keep from crying out. When Lucas came into the room, I was huddled on the floor like a wounded animal. I told him to get out, my voice trembling as I begged him not to look at me. He didn't say a word as he picked me up and tucked me back into bed. Then he quietly started cleaning up the mess I had made. I had never felt more humiliated or useless than I did in that moment. Lucas was such an infuriatingly kind man. He was always hovering around me in the morning, asking if I wanted breakfast or if I wanted to go outside for some sun. He even offered to massage my legs for me. I used to just give him an annoyed shrug to get him to leave me alone, but eventually I started getting used to having him there. I still snapped at him for coming into my space, though. He would just smile and wipe a stray bit of flour or oil off my face, promising to teach me how to cook properly next time. Eventually, I actually learned how to make soup and even bake cookies. Seeing him enjoy the food I made actually made me feel good, which was a very strange sensation. I used to be the most feared executive in the city, and now I was acting like some sort of domestic housewife. It was even scarier to realize I was actually checking the clock and waiting for him to get home. One night, during a massive storm, he came home with a woman from work. He introduced her as a co-worker, but I couldn't stop staring at the way she was holding onto his arm. I felt a surge of cold, sharp jealousy in my chest. I felt like she had no right to be near him. The second she left, I completely lost it. I asked him if he was finally sick of me. I shouted at him, asking if he thought I was no longer good enough for him. He was shocked for a moment before he pulled me into a tight embrace. He told me he loved me for who I was. I just buried my face in his shoulder and sobbed, feeling absolutely humiliated that I had let such a small thing get to me. Physical therapy was a nightmare, pure and simple. But every time I felt like giving up, I would look across the room and see Lucas. He always had this look in his eyes, like he believed in me more than I believed in myself. He'd mouth words of encouragement to me from across the room. He was such an idiot, but it was that same idiot who stood by me through the worst of it. When I finally stood on my own for the first time, he hugged me so hard I thought he might cry. He told me we had done it. I just leaned into him, breathing in the scent of his cologne and the faint smell of the hospital that always seemed to linger on him. In that moment, I realized that maybe being alive wasn't so bad after all. Right now, Lucas is sleeping soundly right next to me. I reached out and gently traced the line of his jaw. I found myself thinking about a question he had asked me once, whether I regretted our meeting. Regrets? I leaned in and whispered into his ear that he was never going to get rid of me. Even in his sleep, he seemed to hear me, a small smile appearing on his face as he pulled me even closer, in a profound defiance of a predetermined tragedy. Lucas Sterling transmigrates into a novel to rescue Olivia Reed. a woman destined to be the story's discarded villainess. By choosing compassion over apathy and providing the unconditional love the world denied her, Lucas helps Olivia reclaim her dignity and rewrite her broken spirit. As they navigate the agonizing journey of physical rehabilitation and emotional healing, Olivia transforms from a vengeful, suicidal shadow into a resilient woman capable of deep affection and renewed purpose. Their shared life becomes a powerful testament to the fact that no fate is truly fixed when met with unwavering sincerity. By saving the woman the original plot tried to break, Lucas proves that love is the ultimate catalyst for change, turning a destined tragedy into a beautiful reality where they are the masters of their own happy ending.